Morena tātou. Hope you all had a good night last night. Before I give you the feedback from our workshops yesterday, what I thought I might do is just explain the process that I've applied to coming to these summaries, and that might be useful. So just to let you know that from each of the PO workshops, I've received around about 400 comments over all the 7 pods, plus notes that I've taken from the Rarawa speakers who have spoken on the stage. So what I do is take those 400 comments and just amalgamate them all together into the different focus areas within each PO. Then I separate them out into 4 different data sets around those 3 questions. What are the issues? What are the priorities? Where do we go to from here? Plus the miscellaneous visions that you've been feeding through. And then what I do is I go through every single comment that you've provided into those workshops and pull out the comments that are generally emphasised and highlighted or repeated. And given that it's a strategic process, I'm also looking for the strategic comments that you've provided. I then take that set of comments, put them all back together so that I can see the big picture. Take your kōrero, turn it into sentences, add the sentences together, and that forms the kōrero that I deliver back to you in the morning. So, just so that you know, the kōrero that I deliver to you isn't screened by my employer, Te Rūnanga o Te Rarawa. It's not screened by the conference organisers, and the intent there is that it's really a reflection of your kōrero. So I do feel a little bit funny sometimes that it starts out a bit heavy, and I don't like to start the mornings heavy. However, if it's heavy, that's because it's the kōrero that you've given. If it's insightful, that's because it's the kōrero that you've given. And so my only hope is that when you hear it, you can hear your kōrero reflected in what I'm feeding back to you. Kapai? So that's the process of the analysis. And the other thing I would just say is that it's really a fairly rapid analysis. When we have more time, there will be a deeper analysis and more detail provided and of a substantial sense from what you have spoken about during the workshops. So with that, I'll provide the feedback from the Cultural PO workshop, which was the first workshop we had yesterday. And as with the workshop structure, we start with the key issues. So, the loss of language, the loss of cultural identity, the loss of tikanga, and the loss of connection with each other permeated the feedback from the Cultural PO workshops yesterday. And those things were clearly identified as the significant cultural issues confronting Te Rarawa at this point in time. And I say this with the utmost of respect, but the almost desperate tone of the workshop comments emphasised the graveness of this situation and pointed to an apparently tangible relationship between the social issues that were described in day 1 of the summit and the disconnection of our Te Rarawa whānau from their traditional cultural values and identity. Now, the optimistic suggestions that the remedy for these ails presided in more marae wānanga were tempered by feedback that whānau attendance at marae wānanga, and hui for that matter, is often meagre and regularly consists of those same dedicated whānau who continue to support the marae on an ongoing basis. But where are the others? The feedback posed the pertinent question of how do we reconnect our whānau with their identity and consequently bring them back to their marae while they are still breathing and able to contribute, as compared to waiting until they come home to be buried. Our facilitator posed the question of whether it is better to have or to be. The workshop identified a range of priorities that clearly describe Te Rarawa as an iwi that wants to be. That is, to be fluent in Te Reo Māori, to be connected and contributing to their hapu and marae, to be in touch with each other and supportive of each other, to be active in the retention and development of the authentic Te Rarawa cultural identity. Retention and regeneration of Te Reo o Te Rarawa featured highly as a key priority to contribute to that state of being. Now this included support for kaumātua and kuia as the guardians of te reo me ona tikanga o te Rarawa, and a timely reminder to value the kōrero of our elders, regardless of whether it is delivered in te reo tuakana, i.e. Māori, or te reo taina, English. Numerous comments pointed to the need for improved mechanisms for teaching te reo o te Rarawa, whether that be to tamariki and mokopuna, or kohanga for grown-ups, or even to kaumātua and kuia without te reo. Now, during the social PO workshop on the first day of the summit, we were informed that it takes 3 generations to save a language, but only 1 generation to lose it. The notion that regeneration of te reo must start in the home was received positively. In addition, feedback re-emphasised the need to support kohanga reo and kurukapapa Māori, which was also highlighted in the social PO workshops. Other priorities included the protection and promotion of taonga tuku iho. The notion of a te Rarawa archival kaupapa and mechanism was supported, and feedback indicated a strong interest in understanding the history of te Rarawa taonga, which was inextricably intertwined with the tikanga, te reo and history of te Rarawa hapu and whānau, whilst also recognising the importance of preserving the mana of these taonga and their guardians. A whare tohunga and whare wānanga to preserve and actively incorporate these taonga into our contemporary experience was also mooted more than once, as was the desire to preserve the knowledge of te Rarawa whakapapa and to advance te Rarawa research. The workshops also confirmed a desire to support mahi toi in all its forms as a tangible expression of creativity that holds the potential to not only express the te Rarawa identity on a local, national and international stage, but also to promote the use of te Rarawa reo me ona tikanga amongst its own whānau, especially our exceptionally talented tamariki. But while these aforementioned priorities featured consistently in the cultural PO workshops, the resounding cry coming through the workshop notes was for hapu and marae to be strengthened, in order to lead the renaissance of these kaupapa in a manner that reflected the function of the different cells in the human body. Just as healthy cells are necessary to fortify the human body, so too are healthy hapu and marae necessary to fortify te Rarawa as an iwi. Albeit at a different scale, the very same development needs of the iwi are present at hapu and marae level. And while the advantages of critical mass underpin the logic of a collaboration at an iwi level, the feedback from the workshops reinforced that the connection with te Rarawa whānau is the domain of hapu and marae, which are best placed to advance the aforementioned priorities. So with these things in mind, the workshop participants, yourselves, turned your attention to the question of what do we need to do to achieve these priorities? And the notion of self-reflection featured in that part of the feedback, firstly in the form of a challenge to comprehend that the primary barrier to progress resided in our own perspectives of what we could or could not do. And some participants noted a slight prickling of conscience when one speaker suggested that people seek advice from the mirror as to how to overcome excuses for not learning te reo. At the other end of the scale, feedback indicated a strong desire to see ourselves better reflected in the world in which we live, and noted that we should not rely on the government or the media to define who we are as a people. Greater provision of te Rarawa visual and performing arts, commercial and cultural branding, archiving, kapahaka, carving, tāmoko and the like would allow us to regularly see our own reflections, thus reinforcing our identity. Mechanisms like wānanga, summit hui, cultural centres, festivals and modern technology were identified as the means to engage our people in these activities. There was recognition that te Rarawa whānau possessed a multitude of talents and skills of the type that would be invaluable in fortifying hapu and marae for the journey ahead. Suggestions included all te Rarawa whānau having a whānau plan in place, the development of a te Rarawa skills database, the formation of skilled te Rarawa teams helping to develop the broader marae skills base, and drawing upon te Rarawa's connected people to connect hapu and marae with those that could stimulate economic development within the rohe. The Cultural Pou workshop proffered a vision of Te Rarawa as a population of te reo speakers. We te reo me ona tikanga were normalised within Te Rarawa rohe, and our mokopuna were able to stand proudly as Te Rarawa. Orera, mamihati kia koutou, mo koutou whakaro pai. That's the feedback from the cultural workshop. If you'll bear with me, I'll go through the economic Pou workshop summary. So starting again with the key issues, the economic Pou workshop feedback, I thought, was remarkable in that almost without fail, the economic imperatives played second fiddle to the cultural, social and environmental imperatives. In a sense, the feedback almost painted economic development as a necessary evil to support in the achievement of the other Pou priorities. And even then, it was not accepted that the prevailing Western perspective of economic development would necessarily be suitable to meet the needs of Te Rarawa. Rather, the feedback roundly endorsed the sentiments of a keynote speaker who defined the Māori economy within the cosmological construct of the traditional Māori belief system, thus shifting the prime objective from money to mana. Hence, economic development becomes the means to the end of achieving wellness for Te Rarawa whānau, rather than an end unto itself. So with this broad perspective in mind, there were nevertheless a range of practical issues that still challenged the ability to generate economic development within Te Rarawa rohe. High on that list of issues was an apparent lack of economic literacy and commercial knowledge across the board, but also including key practices like farm management and commercial governance. You also described the stress created by industry conflicts, citing the recent examples of vandalism in the beekeeping sector. Furthermore, the tension between cultural priorities and commercial priorities also had the potential to create conflict, particularly when whānau find themselves being restricted from carrying out traditional kaimoana gathering practices, yet their own iwi are engaged in commercial fishing and the whānau never seem to see a fish. You question the ability of your iwi to exercise meaningful influence over fisheries management sustainability, even though you are fisheries quota owners. You expressed some concern that Te Rarawa did not feature prominently in the tourism industry, despite it being a low environmental impact industry. You suggested that instead of owning the hotels, we are still making the beds. The failure to utilise multiply owned Māori land was another concern identified in the opening kōrero of the summit and again during the economic Pou workshops. This was particularly in relation to the risk of owners' liability and possible or even probable future alienation of that land as a result of rates arrears. The impact of poverty was highlighted in the workshop comments, noting that our people are working so hard just to survive. There was a suggestion that our whānau who could help may choose not to move home because of a lack of educational opportunities for their children. So with a grasp on some of the key issues confronting economic development for Te Rarawa, you sought to identify the priorities necessary to address those issues. Support for hapu and whānau to develop businesses and create good, sustainable jobs was a given, as was the prerogative that environmental sustainability should underpin economic activity. In fact, you suggested that our future economy was so closely aligned to our environment that protection of our environment was the same as protection of our economy. In a similar vein, the need for alignment of economic development with social and cultural development was also strongly emphasised. The prospect of collaboration amongst Te Rarawa whānau, hapu and marae to achieve economies of scale featured just as prominently as the call for collaboration with other te hiku iwi and other potential industry partners. You felt that Te Rarawa should be offering leadership in the te hiku economy. Your comments gave me a sense that there was a real latent potential in the undeveloped land assets of Te Rarawa whānau and hapu. Certainly your comments suggested we should expand our developmental thinking beyond the primary produce sector and consider shifting our involvement up the value chain. One way you suggested that value could be added was through the appropriate branding of the unique and authentic Te Rarawa identity. Hand in hand with that notion, however, was a strong emphasis on protecting Te Rarawa mātauranga and intellectual property rights. You emphasised the need for transparency, sound risk management, and highlighted a priority for Te Rarawa whānau to accrue tangible benefits from the settlement assets, rather than simply lining up with all of the other consumers to access Te Rarawa goods and services. The most significant priority that consistently featured in the workshop comments was the need for education, including training and skill development, access to specialist skills and expert advice, developing commercial governance and trade training initiatives, and generally increasing the business culture and awareness of Te Rarawa whānau, hapu and marae. You summarised the key priorities as protection, partnership and participation. So armed with the foresight of the identified issues and the targeted priorities, the workshop then asked the question, what do we need to do going forward from this summit? High on the list was the recommendation to develop a Te Rarawa economic model based on whanaungatanga, incorporating management decisions that reflect ngā tikanga o Te Rarawa, for example, kaitiakitanga, aroha, tika and pono. The economic model should incorporate aspects from all four of the Te Rarawa pou. Therein lies the challenge for the economists amongst us. And instead of show me the money, the catchphrase that was offered was, show me the honey. Your comments also suggested an asset stocktake would be sensible and should inform an asset development strategic planning process that considers how to maximise those assets and plots the way forward, balancing the needs of today's whānau with the needs of tomorrow's whānau. You also suggested that Te Rarawa identify what poverty looks like for Te Rarawa in order to address it as part of the economic development process. You suggested that a skills map of Te Rarawa people would be useful. That also appeared in the Cultural Pou workshop. You suggested that we needed to improve intellectual property laws to protect mātauranga Māori. You never suggested how that might happen, just that it needs to, but I'm sure someone will have some good ideas. You commented that going forward effectively would require education to grow whānau, hapu and iwi expertise in business and governance. You asked for expert advisors and farm managers to be made available, along with scholarships and training opportunities. You recommended the development of a policy on the utilisation of undeveloped lands involving the untapped Te Rarawa workforce. You suggested that Te Rarawa should develop its entrepreneurialism and not be scared to try things and make mistakes. The Economic Pou workshop proffered some aspirational visions for economic development, including that key vision of the development of an alternative, mana-based economic model entrenched in and responsive to Te Rarawa needs and aspirations. Another keynote speaker shared his vision for the incremental growth of the Te Rarawa iwi asset to $1 billion by 2112. That speaker also offered a new mantra to describe Te Rarawa as an iwi where whānau succeeding is the centre of the universe. Nō reira, ngā atu kia koutou, mō tō koutou whakaaro pai. Thank you for your comments. That's the last you'll hear from me. I just want to say it's been a privilege to be a part of this conference. Angami, tēnā koutou katoa.